Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to a new this is kind of like a continuation of reading Carl Schmitt a little bit. Today, we're going to be spending his 1929 article, The Age of Neutralization and Depolitization, which he gave in Barcelona in 1929, which is part of the expanded edition of the concept of political, published by the University of Chicago Press edition, which was a kind of an expanded edition that included this chapter. The traditional copy, originally the Schmidt's concept of political, was published by, God, I think it's in the 1970s by Rutgers, right? Back in Rutgers. I have one edition of that. And then by Schwab, and then in the late 1980s, early 90s, it was republished by University of Chicago, and then published again with Terry. I think I want to say not Sheldon Wolin. Okay, I'm forgetting the name. This Germanic scholar who dealt with this, who not Wolin. It was hold on, just give me myself. Sorry, Tracy Strong. I'm thinking of Wolin. No, Sheldon Wolin. No. Tracy Strong. Tracy Strong, who also kind of did an edition, wrote the introduction to a an edition of Weber's concept of the political, a concept of the we call it the politics as vocation, that was published by Hackett in the 1990s. Terry Strong was very much influenced in these kind of Germanic writers of this 19th period of Weber, Schmitt, and this period of the Weimar transition, and therefore he was, kind of, even though a man of the left, thought that this was, in fact, the left is the one who kind of revitalized interest in Schmitt. So this is the expanded edition, with this famous essay, Neutralizations and Depoliticizations, which was, I think, translated for and published in Toils, again, this kind of left-wing journal, originally left-wing journal of the 1970s and early 80s, that became the center of Schmitt publishing, right? So therefore, let's look at this essay, okay? I think it's a pretty long essay, so who's going to be driving us crazy, right? Cosmet, we in Central Europe live solely the Russia, the Rus. The words under this. Yeah, I was correct. Under the eyes of Russia, under the eyes of Russia. This is true today, even, right? We in Central Europe live in the eyes of Russia. For a century, their psychological gaze has seen through our great words and institutions. Their vitality is strong enough to seize our knowledge and technological as weapons. Their prowess and rationalism and its opposite, as well as their potential for good and evil and orthodoxy, is overwhelming. They have realized the union of socialism and Slavism, which already in 1848 Donato Cortez said would be the decisive event of the next century. This is our situation. We can no longer say anything worthwhile about culture and history without first becoming aware of our own cultural and historic limitations. That all historic knowledge is knowledge of the present. And such knowledge obtains its light and intensity from the present, and in the most profound sense only serves the present, because all spirit is only spirit of the present, as has been said by many since Hegel, but best of all by Croce, Benito Croce. Among, Along with many famous historians of the last generation, we have the simple truth before our eyes. There is no longer anyone today who would be deceived by the accumulation of facts as to how much historical representation and construction is filled by naive projections and identifications. Thus, we must first be aware of our own historical situation. So therefore, we have to understand these questions. We have to come an understanding of our historic situation. The remark about the Russians was intended to remind us of this. Such a conscious assessment is difficult today, but for this reason, all the more necessary. All signs point to the fact that 1929, we in Europe still live in a period of exhaustion and efforts at restoration. And it is as common and understandable after the Great Wars of Napoleonic, the wars that and the particularly the Franco-Prussian War and then lastly the First World War. Right, following the Allied war against France, which lasted 20 years, almost a whole generation of Europeans was in a similar state of mind, which after 1815 could be reduced to the formula legitimacy of the status quo. At um, such uh, uh, times, all arguments actually entail less the revival of things past or disappearing this past disappearing than a desperate foreign and domestic policy, the status quo. What else? In the interim, the calm mood of the Restoration brought forth a rapid and uninterrupted development of new things and new circumstances whose meanings and directions are hidden beyond restored facades. In other words, the restoration is not possible. In other words, it seems to be that the restoration is not possible. It's a facade. The restoration is kind of a facade of new questions and new possibilities. And when the decisive moment arrives, the legitimating foreground vanishes like an empty phantom. The Russians has taken the European 19th century at its word, understood its core, and draw the ultimate conclusions from its cultural premises. We always live in the eyes of the more radical brother, who compels us to draw the practical conclusions and pursue its end. Altogether, aside from foreign and domestic policy prognosis, one thing is certain that the anti religious technicity which has been put into practice on Russian soil, that there a state arose which is more intensely statist than ruled any by the absolute princes, Philip II, Louis XIV, or Frederick the Great. Our present situation can be understood only as a consequence of the last centuries of European development. It's completely transcends specific European ideas and demonstrates in one enormous climax the core of modern European history. Subsection: the successive stages of changing central domains. Let us recall the stages in which European mind has moved over the four last centuries, the various intellectual domains in which it has the center of its immediate human existence. There are four great, simple secular stages, corresponding to the 4 centuries proceeding from the theological to the metaphysical domain, from there to the humanitarian moral, and finally to the economic domain. So therefore, this is so. What as we get is these four great stages, this secular stages, 4 centuries. One is the theological, metaphysical to the humanitarian moral to the economic domain. So economic, humanitarian, moral, metaphysical, theological, right? The theological to the metaphysical, metaphysical to the humanitarian. The great interpreters of human history, Vico and Comte, generalized this unique European occurrence into a common law of human development, subsequently propagated in thousands of banal and vulgar formations, such as the laws of 3 stages, from the theological to the metaphysical, and from there to the scientific stage or positivism. In reality, one cannot positively say more than that, since the 16th century, Europeans moved in several stages from one central domain to another, and that everything which constitutes our cultural development is the result of such stages. In the past 4 centuries of European history, intellectual life had 4 different centers, and the thinking of the active elite, which constituted the respective vanguards, moved in changing centuries around changing centers. The concept of changing generations can only be understood from these shifting centers. It should be emphasized that the shift from the theological to the metaphysical domain, and there from the humanitarian moral, and then finally to the economic domain, is not meant as a theory of cultural and intellectual dominance. Is not meant as not as a historical philosophical law in the sense of a law of three stages or similar constructions. I speak not of human culture as a whole, but not I speak not of human culture as a whole, not of the rhythm of world history. I am able to speak neither about the Chinese nor the East Indian or the Egyptians. Thus, the successive stages of the changing central domains are conceived neither as the continuous line of progress upwards or the opposite. In other words, this is not this is shifting is a European. I think he's trying to say here. He's not. This is not creating a universal system of human history. It is quite another question whether one wishes to interpret this as a succession of stages upward or downwards, as an ascent or decline. In other words, it's a question: is this a upward an upward mobility of betterness towards better or towards worse? Right? It's these stages of European development. Finally, it would be misunderstanding to interpret the successive stages in such a way that each of these centuries was nothing more than the central domain. In other words, it's only this domain thing. On the contrary, there's always a plurality of diverse, already spent stages coexisting. In other words, people in the same age, in the same country, even the same family, live together in different stages. For example, today in Berlin is culturally closer to New York and Moscow than to Munich and Trier. There was this idea. New York is a cosmopolitan big city. These big cities are more connected to each other. The change in central domain concerns only the concrete fact that in these 4 centuries of human European history, the intellectual vanguard changed, that its convictions and arguments continued to change, as did the context of its intellectual interests, the basis of its actions, the secret of its political success, and the willingness of the great masses to be impressed by certain suggestions. So these vertices, in other words, these changes, these domains are connected to the elites, who did what? Who, in their interests, their intellectual interests, and the basis of actions, and the reasons why they succeeded, and the willingness of the masses to be impressed by what they that. Okay? The transition from the theological of the 16th century to the metaphysics of the 17th century, which is not only metaphysically but scientifically the greatest age of Europe, the heroic age of Occidental rationalism, is as clear and distinct as any historical occurrence. This epoch of systemic scientific thinking encompasses Suarez and Bacon, Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, Grotius, Hobbes, Spinoza, Pascal, Leibniz, and Newton. All the astonishing mathematical, astronomical, and scientific insight of this age were built into a great metaphysical or natural system. All thinkers were metaphysicians on a grand scale, and even the typical superstition was alike cosmic and rational in the form of astrology. The 18th century shunted metaphysics with the help of the constructions of the deistic philosophy, and was a vulgarization on a grand scale. The Enlightenment, literary approximations of the great accomplishments of the 17th century, humanism and rationalism, there was literary accomplishment of the accomplishment of the 17th century. In other words, there was literary accomplishments of this earlier century. The Enlightenment was what of humanism and rationalism. Right? One can. This was literary approximations of these things of the previous century, of the humanism and rationalism. One can follow in detail how Suarez continued to have influence in many popular works. As for the basic concepts of morality and state, Pufendorf is only a great, only an epigone epic of Suarez in the final analysis. Rousseau's social contract is in turn only a vulgarization of Pufendorf. But the specific pathos of the 18th century is virtue. Its mythical designation is virtu, duty. Even Rousseau's Romanticism yet does not conspicuously break the frame of moral categories. A typical expression of this century is Kant's conception of God. As someone once said, rather crudely, in Kant's system, God appears as a parasite of ethics. Every word of his critique of pure reason, critique, pure, and reason is polemically directed against dogma, metaphysics, and ontology. A secularization followed in the 19th century, an apparently hybrid and impossible combination of aesthetic and romantic, the economic technical tendencies. In other words, an impossible combination of the aesthetic romantic and the economic tendency. In reality, the romanticism of the 19th century signifies, if we want to utilize the modern didactic word romanticism in a way different from the phenomena itself, as a vehicle of confusion, only the intermediary stage of the aesthetic between the moralism of the 18th century and the economicism of the 19th century. Only a transition which precipitated the aestheticization of all intellectual domains. It did so easily and successfully. The way from the metaphysical and moral domain is through the aesthetic domain. In other words, metaphysical and moral, the way from the metaphysical and moral domains is through the aesthetic domain, which is the surest and most comfortable way to the general economization of intellectual life and to the state of mind which finds the core categories of human existence in production and consumption. So, in other words, value, aesthetics. Comes up with the concept of value. This leads us to the question of value. The term value, right? Beauty becomes value. We evaluate it, okay? And that's what he kind of means, I think, here. In the further development of intellectual life, romantic aestheticism promoted economic thinking and is a typical attendant phenomena. In the 19th century, however, technism still appeared in close association with economism as industrialism. The most typical example of this well-known historic and social construction of the Marxist system. It holds that economics is the basis and foundation of everything intellectual and spiritual. Already in this economic core, it is clearly recognized that the economic epochs of humankind are determined by specific technical means. Yet the system as such is an economic system in which technical elements appear only elements appear only in later vulgarization. Marxism wants to think in economic terms and thus remains in the 19th century, to which was economics to the core. Already in the 19th century, technical progress proceeds at an extending rate, even as did social and economic situation as a consequence, that all moral and political, social, and economic situations were affected. Given the overpowering suggestion of a new and surprising inventions and achievements, there arose a religion of technical progress, which promised all other problems would be solved by technological progress. This belief was self-evident to the great masses of the industrial countries. They skipped all the intermediate stages, typical of the thinking intellectual vanguards, and turned the belief in miracles and turned the belief in miracles and afterlife, a religion without intermediary stages, into a religion of technical miracles, human achievements, and the domination of nature. A magical religiosity became an equal magical technicity. The 20th century began as the age not only of technology, but of religion belief in technology. It often called the age of technology, but this is only a tentative characterization of the whole situation. The question, the okay, the question of the significance of the overwhelming technicity, should now be left open, because the belief in technology is in fact only the result of a certain tendency of the shifting of the central domain as a belief, and it is only the resulting of the shifting. All concepts of all concepts of the spiritual sphere, including the concept of spirit, are pluralistic in themselves and can only be understood in terms of concrete political existence. In other words, all concepts of spiritual sphere, including the concept of the spirit, are pluralistic in themselves and can be only understood in the concrete political sphere, just as every nation has its own concept of nation and finds the constitutive characteristics of nationality within itself. So every culture, every cultural epoch has its own concept of culture. All essential concepts are not normative but existential. Those all concepts, as all essential concepts, are not normative, not but existential. And if centers of intellectual life has shifted in the last 4 centuries, so have all concepts and words. So if the epochs, in other words, if the centers of the life has shifted, so have concepts and all concepts and words. It is thus necessary to bear in mind the ambiguity of every concept and word. The greatest, the most egregious misunderstanding, from which, of course, many im, im, imposters make their living, can be explained by the erroneous transfer of the concept at home in one domain, only in the metaphysical, the moral, economic, to another domain of intellectual life. In other words, this moving of this domain to another. Imposters can do this transferring of this thing to this thing. And erroneous transfer. In other words, many imposters make their living taking one thing and selling it to another, right? Moving from one domain to the other domain of intellectual life. It is not only true that incidents and events which make their mark on people and become the object of personal reflection and discussion have a reference to the central domain, e.g., the Lisbon earthquake could occasion a whole flood of moralizing literature, whereas today a similar event would pass almost unnoticed. Right? The Lisbon earthquake at one time would be all this moralizing literature, whereas today a similar event would pass unnoticed. It is also true that an economic catastrophe such as the sharp monetary devaluation crash occasions widespread and acute interest, both practical and theoretical. So different situations, different things. In other words, the earthquake, not much fun, but economic collapse, that does it, right? Different stages, different things. The specific concepts of individual centuries also derive their meanings from the respective central domains. One will suffice. The concept of progress, i.e., an improvement or completion, in modern jargon, a rationalization, becomes dominant in the 18th century, in an age of humanitarian moral belief. Accordingly, progress meant above all progress in culture, self-determination, and education, moral perfection. In the age of economic or technical thinking, it is self-evident that progress is economic or technical progress. To the extent that anyone is still interested in humanitarian moral progress, it appears as a byproduct of economic progress. It's if a domain of thought becomes central, then the problems of other domains are solved in terms of central domain. They are considered secondary. They are considered secondary problems whose solution follows as a matter of course only from the problems of the central domains are solved. So therefore, in other words, that economics becomes subordinate. In other words, in the time of moral things, metaphysical things are subordinated to that. In other words, each stage, the things that other issues are subordinated to that. Here is therefore in the technical, the moral issue is subordinated to the technical issue. In the theological age, everything runs smoothly if the theological questions are in order. Everything else is provided by definition. The same is true of other ages. In the humanitarian and moral age, it is only necessary to inculcate morals, whereby all problems become problems of education. In the economic age, one needs only solve adequately the problem of production and distribution of goods in order to make superfluous all moral and social questions. The mere technical thinking also solves the economic problems with new technical developments. All questions, including economic, recede before the task of technical progress. Before the task of technical progress. Another sociological example of the plurality of such concepts is the clerk, the typical representative of intellectual publicity, whose specific characteristics are determined in every century by the central domain. The theologian and the preacher in the 16th century was followed by the scholarly systematizer of the 17th century, who lived in a true scholarly republic and thus removed from the masses. Then followed the author of the Enlightenment and still the aristocrat in the still aristocrat 18th century. As a result of the 19th century, one should not be dissuaded by the intermissio of romantic genius and other many priests of private religion. In the cleric of the 19th century, first and foremost, Karl Marx became an economic expert. The question is the question is how readily economic thinking will permit the sociological type of clerk, and whether political economists and refined economic syndicalists are able to constitute an intellectual elite. In any case, it appears technical thinking can no longer accommodate a clerk. Right, this idea. It appears that the technical thinking can no longer accommodate a clerk. More will be said below about the age of technicity, but the brief references are enough to evidence the plurality of the clerk as a type. As said above, all concepts such as God, freedom, progress, anthropological conception of human nature, the public domain, rationality, and rationalization, and finally the concept of nature and culture itself, derive their concrete historical context from the situation of the central domain and can only be grasped therefrom. In other words, the central domain, the central issue, that all these other things are going to be shaped and defined by this thing. Above all, the state also derives its reality and power from the central domain, because the decisive disputes of friend-enemy groupings are also determined by it. As long as religious theological matters were the central focus, the maxim of cuja regio igiuri, the religion of the prince, religion of the people, had a political meaning. When the religious theoretical matters ceased to dominate the central domain, this maxim lost its practical import. In the meanwhile, however, it moved from the cultural stages of the nation to the principle of nationality, cujo religio iso natio, right? So, whose religion? Who is this religion? Right? Who is? In other words, literary magnum stems from the religious civil war meaning of whose region this? Whose region this religion? Literally means whoever governs this decides the religion, right? That's whose region decides the religion, right? Becomes the whose region is the nation, is this nation, to the economic domain, where it came to mean one and the same state cannot accommodate two contradictory economic systems, i.e., capitalism and communism are mutually exclusive. The Soviet state has realized the maxim cuja regio est economica, that of the region is the in a way which proves that the connection between a compact domain and the compact's intellectual homogeneity holds not only for the religious struggle of the 16th century, But for the majority of small and middle-sized European states, and for the majority of small and middle-sized European states, but always accommodates the changing central domains and changing dimensions of autarkic world empires. In other words, the, autarkic means that this idea of together, this idea of holding together, self-sufficient. Um, Essentially, here is that a homogeneous economic state conforms to economic thinking. Such a state wants to be modern, a state which knows its own time and cultural situation. It must claim to understand historic development as a whole, which is the basis of its right to rule. In an economic age, the state which does not claim to understand and direct economic relations must declare itself neutral with respect to the political questions and decisions whereby renounce its claim to rule. Right? If it either knows what it is or it doesn't know. If it doesn't know, then it must renounce its claim. Now, it is remarkable that the European liberal state of the 19th century could portray itself as a stato natura ed agnostico, in other words, a natural and agnostic, as a natural and agnostic state, and could see its existential legitimization precisely in its neutrality. Right? In other words, the idea of the liberal state is a neutral state. It doesn't. It must. It announces its claim to rule, and there are various reasons for this. It cannot be explained in one word or a single clause. Here, here it is certainly interesting as a symptom of the general cultural neutrality, because the 19th century doctrine of the neutral state um, belonged to a general tendency of intellectual neutrality characterized by European history in the last century. In my view, this is the historic explanation for what is called the age of technology, which still requires at least a few words of explanation. The stages of neutralization and depoliticizations. The succession of stages, that from theological over the metaphysical to the moral to the economic, simultaneously signifies a series of progressive neutralizations of domain, whose centers have shifted. I consider the strongest and most consequential of the intellectual shifts of European history to be the one in the 17th century, from the traditional Christian theology to natural science. Until now, this shift determined the direction of all further development. All generalizing laws of human history, such as Comte's law as through stages, or Spencer's development scheme from the military to the industrial age, and similar the historical philosophical constructions stand in the shadow of this great progress. At the core of this astounding shift lies an elemental impulse that has been decisive for centuries: the striving for a neutral domain. Right? This idea, the striving for a neutral domain. Those following the hopeless theological disputes and struggles of the 16th century, Europeans sought a neutral domain in which where there would be no conflict, and they could reach a common agreement through debate and exchanges of opinion. Whereafter, one no longer espoused the controversial concepts and arguments of Christian theology, instead constituted a natural system of theology, metaphysics, and morality and law. Dithley describes this process of intellectual history as in a justly famous exposition, in which he emphasizes above all the greatest significance of the Stoic tradition. But the essence of the point for me is that theology, the former central domain, was abandoned because it was controversial, in favor of another, neutral domain. The former central domain became neutralized in that it ceased to be the central domain. On the basis of this new central domain, one hoped to find a minimum agreement and common premises, allowing for the possibility of security, clarity, prudence, and peace. Europeans thus moved in the direction of neutralization and minimalization, where they accepted the law which kept. Okay, let's take a little slug of water. Let's look at that line for a second. They accepted the law, which kept them in line for the following centuries and constituted their concept of truth. Concepts elaborated over many centuries of theological reflection now become uninteresting in mere private matters. In other words, the previous conceptual, not interesting in their private matters. In the metaphysics of the 18th century, deism, God himself was removed from the world and reduced to a neutral instance vis-a-vis the struggles and antagonisms of real life. As Harman argued against Kant, he became a concept and ceased to be an essence. In other words, this is against Kant. In other words, he became a concept and ceased to be an essence. This is Hartman against Kant, that God became a concept rather than an essence. In the 19th century, the first monarch and then the state became a neutral power, initiating a chapter on the history of political theology in which liberal doctrines of the pouvoir neutral and the statio neutral, in which the process of neutralization finds its classical formula. In other words, the process of neutralization finds its classical formula because it also has grasped what is most decisive: political power. In other words, the question of political power. In other words, the liberal doctrine of this, right, of the natural power, the neutral power, and the state, natural state, because political power. But in the dialectic of such a development, one creates a new domain of struggle precisely through the shifting of the central domain. In the new domain, at first considered neutral, the antithesis of men and interests unfold with a new intensity and becomes increasingly sharper. Europeans have always wandered from a conflictual to a neutral domain, and always the newly won neutral domain has become immediately another arena of struggle, once again necessitating the search for a new neutral domain. Scientific thinking was also unable to achieve peace. In other words, the religious wars evolved into into the still cultural yet always economically determined national wars of 19th century, and finally into economic wars. So therefore, this is the religious wars went into culture still economic determined wars, and then this is what then turned into the economic wars. The evidence of widespread contemporary belief in technology is only based on the presupposition of that absolute and ultimate neutral ground has been found in technology, since apparently there is nothing more neutral. Technology serves everyone, just as radio is utilized for the news, of all kinds, and the postal service delivers packages regardless of their contents, since its technology can provide no criteria of evaluating them. Unlike theological, metaphysical, and moral, and even economic questions. In other words, unlike theological, metaphysical, and moral, and even economic questions, which are forever debatable, pure technological problems have something refreshingly factual about them. They are easy to solve, and it's easy understandable why there is a tendency to take refuge in technicity from the intractable problems of all the other domains. Here, all people and nations, all classes and religions, all generations and races appear to be able to agree because all make use of and take granted the advantages and amenities of technical comforts. Thus, this appears to be the ground of a general equalization, which Max Scheler advocated in a 1927 election. Okay, what is this? 6. Now, this is a lecture of here. This is, again, part of a public lecture we call in the summer of 27. This is where you can see the notes are different from this edition. Here, all struggles and confusions of religion, national and social conflicts were leveled into a neutral domain. Technology appeared to be the domain of peace, understanding, and reconciliation. The other explicit link between pacifist and technological belief is explained by this turn towards towards neutralization, what the European mind took in the 17th century, and which by its fate has been pursued into the 20th century. But the neutrality of technology is something other than neutrality of all former domains. Technology always is always only an instrument and weapon, precisely because it serves all. It is not neutral. No single decision can be derived from the immanence of technology, least of all of neutrality. Every type of culture, every people, every religion, every war and peace can use technology as a weapon. Given that instruments and weapons become even more useful, the probability of their being used becomes even much greater. Technical progress needs not be either metaphysical or moral, and not particularly economic to be progress. If humanitarian moral progress is still expected by many today from the perfection of technology, it is because technology is magically linked to morality on some somewhat naive assumption that the splendid array of contemporary technology will be used only as intended, i.e., sociologically, and that they themselves will control these frightful weapons that yield this monstrous power. Right? This is very much the case, right? Think of this: the idea that we put up with all these technology advantages because we think we control them. What happens if someone else controls them, and that they're used against you? So they can be used against you. We see how the left has taken over and weaponized all these instruments of these things, right? Even economics can be weaponized in that sense. Even the business entity, the management structure, all these things can be weaponized. And those control this, but in other words, control these frightful weapons and yield their monstrous power. But technology itself remains culturally blind. Consequently, no conclusion which can be drawn from the cultural domain of spiritual life can be derived from pure technology as nothing but technology. Neither the concept of culture progress, nor a type of clerk or spiritual leader, nor a specific political system. In other words, so far has not been derived from this idea that maybe we see in China a technological dictatorship. So far, the hope that a politically dominant elite develop out of the commonality of technical innovators has not yet been fulfilled. The constructions of Saint Germain and other sociologists who anticipated the industrial society are either not purely technical, but rather humanitarian, moral, and economic elements, or simply fantastic. Not even the direction of the contemporary economy is in the hands of the technicians. At, and until now, nobody has been able to construe a social order led by technicians other than the one lacking any leadership or direction. Now, this is where Burnham's managerial model maybe answers a question. The managerial model, the technician is controlled by the manager. The technician is a manager. A manager is a technician. Um, this is something Schmitt did not think of, I think, and I'm surprised Schmitt didn't think of this. The idea that what has replaced this economic model, what's replaced the nature of the economic model is no longer ownership, but management and administration. The administrator is a manager in that sense, right? Um, okay, we see this, right? Not even, in other words, let's stop investing. Not even the economic dimension of contemporary economy is in the hands of the technicians. And until now, nobody has been able to construe a social order by technicians other than the one lacking in any leadership or direction. Even George Soros did not, George Soros did not remain an engineer. He became a clerk, a civil servant, right? No significant technical innovation can ever calculate its objective political results. So no significant can ever calculate its objective political results. The inventions of the 15th and 16th century produced liberating individualistic and rebellious developments. The inventions of the printing press led to freedom of the press. Only technical innovations are the means of domination of the masses on a large scale. Radio belongs to broadcast monopoly, film to the censor. The decision concerning freedom, and I would say the internet too, the owners, the people who can create the social media networks by which it operates. Again, isn't this line really the importance of McLuhan, Marsh McLuhan's "the medium is the message," right? The medium and the instrument of means of the things becomes the message itself in the system of domination, of control, right? The print press led to freedom, but the technical innovations are domination of the masses at large, right? The decisions concerning freedom and slavery lie not in technology as such, which can be revolutionary or reactionary, can serve freedom or oppression, centralization or decentralization. Like the internet, say the internet is neutral. It can either log if it's in other words the internet of the original internet of the 1990s was decentralized. The new internet of now, as we enter the 21st century, the current epoch, is centralizing. Okay, so that technology does not lead one way or the other. It's both. It depends on the will of the agency, right? This is what Schmitt is trying to point to. Can serve freedom or oppression, centralization or decentralization. Neither a political question nor a political answer can derive from a pure technical principles and perspective. So technology of itself, in itself, offers no answer. It doesn't give it inherent direction. The political direction, those who control it in their intention, whether they want to give freedom or they want to control, they want it to be a revolutionary or reactionary, to freedom or oppression, to centralize or decentralize. The previous German generation, under the spell of the cultural decline, um, uh, did not have to await the World War, and certainly not the 1918 collapse, and Spengler's decline of the West. In other words, there was the collapse in 1918, and then Spengler's decline of the West. Right, didn't have to wait that the spell of decline was there. Expressions of such a mood can be found in Ernest Toller, Max Weber, and Walter Rathenau. The irresistible power of technology appears here as the domination of spiritlessness over spirit, or perhaps an ingenious but soulless mechanism. Again, Nietzsche, right? Isn't that Nietzsche also, right? This idea of the last man. The last man is this spiritless thing, and that therefore this happiness, this is something that this, in other words, the domination of the spiritless of the spirit, perhaps an ingenious but soulless mechanism. A European century which bewailed the medley this cycle, the famous, the end of the cycle, the end of the malady of the cycle, awaited the domination of a Caliban, or after us the savage god, was succeeded by a German generation which complained about the soulless age of technology, in which the soul is helpless and powerless. In Max Schiller's metaphysics of the powerless God, or Leopold Ziegler's construction of a mere individual effectuating and ultimately powerless elite, there will be still evidence of helplessness, be it of the soul or the spirit, vis-a-vis the age of technology. So the technological world is a world of helplessness in that sense. It doesn't have a direction. It's this powerlessness, this sense of powerlessness, this idea of the helpless soul. That there's all this power, but then there's powerlessness, and even ultimately powerless elite. That there's still manifestation of helplessness. But not only the overall thing, but even the elite is helpless. The anxiety was legitimate because this is the breaking of in other words, World War One did not really lend to this cycle of despair, this collapse of this cultural decline that the German world felt, right, at the end of that, even prior to the First World War and after the First World War, particularly, this powerlessness, right. Um, uh, 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 Vis-a-vis the age of technology, right? The anxiety was legitimate because it sprang from the dark feelings of the consequences of the consequences of the just concluded process of neutralization. In other words, when the neutralization is done like this whole process of neutralizing the dominant thing, along this process, the technology comes and is okay. It's supposed to neutralize those things, but does it? No, because there's no answer, no direction. In other words, the feeling of the consequence of the just concluded process of neutralization. Along with technology, intellectual neutrality had become intellectually meaningless, had become intellectually meaningless. In other words, neutrality has become meaningless. Once everything had been abstracted from religion and theology, then from metaphysics and the state, everything appeared to have been abstracted from above all culture, ending in the neutralization of cultural death, right? Whereas a vulgar mass religion predicated on the apparent neutrality of technology awaited human paradise. The greatest sociologists felt that the tendency which had dominated all stages of the modern European spirit now threatened culture itself. This depolitization, this neutralization, right? Was going to affect culture, threaten culture itself. To this was added the anxiety of the new classes and masses, which had arisen from the tabula rasa created by the restless technicalization. In other words, new masses and new classes emerged from the blank slate of the technology. Okay, he's saying. In other words, this anxiety added the new classes from the blank slate created by the restless technicalization. New and even alien masses threatening to traditional education and taste continually arose from this cultural and social nothingness. But the anxiety was ultimately nothing more than the doubt about the ability to control and utilize the marvelous instrument of the new technology. The result of human understanding and specialized knowledge. As a result of human understanding and specialized knowledge, such a dispute, such as a discipline, and a particular modern technology, and in particular modern technology, cannot be simply presented as a dead and soulless any more than the religion of technicity can be confused with technology itself. The spirit of technicity, which has led to the mass belief in an anti-religious anti-religious activism, is still spirit, perhaps an evil and demonic spirit, but not one which can be dismissed as mechanistic and attributed to technology. So this the spirit of technology, this idea of this point of this idea of the technical class, the technical world, the technical system, which looks at religion. In other words, which has led to mass belief in an irreligious activism, right? An anti-religious activism. This is still spirit. It may be demonic, it might be evil, what he says, but it cannot be dismissed as mechanic attributed to technology of itself. It is perhaps something gruesome, but not itself technical and mechanical. It is the belief that the atavistic metaphysics, the belief in the unlimited power and domination of man over nature, even over human nature, the belief in the unlimited receding of natural boundaries, and the unlimited possibilities for change and prosperity. In other words, this release of this principle, that no limits. In other words, the belief in the atavistic metaphysics, the belief in the unlimited power and the domination of man over nature, even over human nature, the belief in the unlimited receipt. Think of the transgender nonsense, right? That we can take our sexuality, we can create our identity, that we can create. Again, this is the conquest of nature in the most absolute sense, right? The belief in unlimited receding of natural boundaries, right, and the unlimited possibilities for change and prosperity. Such a belief can be called fantastic and satanic, but not simply dead, spiritless, or mechanically soulless. So that's the problem. The spirit technology is not this is not this soulless nature, this death of culture idea. This idea that this is going to be a death of culture, that the doctrines of neutralization produces this neutral situation, that we get a peak of neutralization, which leads to soullessness. That was the 19th century view, right? But they what Schmitt is saying, that maybe this is not the end. That what happens is this new class has creates a new religion or a new belief system of this progress and the absolute sense, right? And that this is a more powerful sense of absolute sense of technical things, right? The fear of cultural and sociological nothingness sprang more from the anxiety-ridden panic over the threatened status quo than from the cool-headed knowledge of the particularity of intellectual process and their dynamics. In other words, the fear and the kind of this end of 19th century thing and fear came more of what? The threatened status quo, the existing stage threatened by the new stage, rather than an understanding of the new stage, the new technology in that sense. All new and great impulses, every revolution and reformation, every new elite originates from asceticism and voluntary or involuntary poverty. Poverty meaning above all the renunciation of the security of the status quo. So wait a minute, this is actually very important to think about this. If in other words, every new elite, in other words, all new and great impulses, every revolution, reformation, every new elite originates from an asceticism or voluntary or involuntary poverty. And poverty means here what? Meaning the above all renunciation of the security of the status quo. So you have to, in other words, what's wrong with the revolution? As long as you're happy with the status quo, you're not. You're gonna. In other words, you're afraid of keeping your status. You're not going to bring about the change or the reformation. Only if you're willing to sacrifice the status quo, sacrifice, surrender under the status quo, embrace the poverty of the moment, and renunciate the system. Then only then you can engage in the change, right? The benefit of the status quo, the security of the status quo. Originally, Christianity, serious reforms of Christianity, the Benedictine, the Catholic, the Franciscan, the Baptist, and the Puritans, every genuine rebirth, seeking to return to some original principle, even genuine retor et al principato, every return to pure, uncorrupted nature, appears as cultural or political nothingness to the comfort and ease of the existing status quo. So that's again the status quo. In other words, this is why the status quo looks at the people and oh my God, they're nihilists, right? We hear that, right? They're nihilists. No, that's because the people who are seeking change have renunciated. They've accepted. They don't care about the status quo. They don't care what the results of the status quo of the current system. They don't really want. They're not operating under the status. So therefore, they look nihilistic in that sense. This is very good. I think this Schmitt has a good insight here. I think something people have to understand. Um, uh, 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 in other words, that from the existence of those who seek the status quo, those who wishing to change and cause that are nihilists, right? They appear appear as cultural or sociological nothingness of the existing status quo. It grows silently and in darkness, and a historian of sociology would recognize only nothingness in its initial phases. The moment of brilliant representation is and only and at once the moment in which every link to the secret and inconspicuous beginnings is in danger. In other words, at this moment, the representation, the brilliant representation, is also, and at once the moment in which every link to the secret and inconspicuous beginning is in danger. The process of continuous neutralization of various domains of cultural life has reached its end because technology is at hand. Technology is no longer neutral. Technology is no longer neutral ground in the sense of the process of neutralization. Every strong politics will make use of it. For this reason, the present century can only be understood provisionally as a century of technology. How it ultimately will be understood will be revealed only when it's known which type of politics is strong enough to master the new technology and which type of genuine friend enemy grouping can develop on this new ground. Woo, that's the insight. Isn't that the Schmittian insight? In other words, the realm of technology is not a what does not end a new neutralization. The problem, the age of technology is not a neutral state. It cannot be neutral. It is neutral only in that it's a tool. It is a means. It is a mechanism that whoever uses it, so it can be good or evil, and it doesn't transcend good and evil. It just can. So therefore, let's repeat that line. There was a process of continuous neutralization of various domains of cultural life has reached its end because technology is at hand. Technology is no longer neutral ground in the sense of the process of neutralization. Every strong politics will make use of it, he says. Therefore, this century will be understood as a century of technology, will be basically the question of which political system is able to have to make use, master it, and get control. And therefore which friend enemy grouping can develop in this new ground. The great masses of industrial peoples today will still cling to a torpid religion of technicity because they, like all masses, seek radical results and believe subconsciously in absolute depolitization sought after 4 centuries can be found here, and that universal peace begins here. Yet technology can do nothing more than intensify peace or war. It is equally available to both. In this respect, nothing changes by speaking of in the name of or employing the magic formula of peace. Today, we see through the fogs of names and words, which the psychotechnical machinery of mass suggestion works. In other words, this idea of peace. In other words, the cycle begins this idea of this is the word psychotechnical machinery of mass suggestion. That's very interesting. What is this? This is this way of propaganda, right? Propaganda and instruction. Create this idea that intensifies in your hopes, intensify in your belief in this mass belief. The mass believes in this. They don't understand this situation. They're ignorant of that. They think this process of the old will continue, right? Today we recognize the secret law of this vocabulary and know that the most terrible war is pursued only in the name of peace. The most terrible oppression only in the name of, of, of freedom. The most terrible inhumanity only in the name of humanity. That's the thing, right? This weird possession, right? He says, let's do that line. I think this is a very shocking thought here. In other words, today we recognize the vocabulary that the only most terrible war is pursued only in the name of peace. The most terrible oppression only in the name of freedom. The most terrible inhumanity only in the name of humanity. Finally, we see through the mode that generation which saw only spiritual death or soulless mechanism in the age of technicity. We recognize the pluralism of spiritual life and know that the central domain of spiritual existence cannot be a neutral domain, and that it is wrong to solve a political problem. In other words, it is wrong to solve a political problem with the antithesis of organic and mechanical life and death. Well, a political problem cannot be resolved. In other words, we can't get a neutral domain. In other words, it cannot be a neutral domain. And it's wrong to solve a political problem with the antithesis of organic and mechanicistic life or death. A life which has only death as its antithesis is no longer life, but powerlessness and helplessness. So that's what a life which only has death as its antithesis is no longer life, but powerlessness and helplessness. Whoever knows no other enemy than death and recognizes his enemy nothing more than an empty mechanism is nearer to death than to life. So therefore, you don't have an enemy. This is the point. In other words, you only see the opposite as death, right? The opposite of life is death. No, the antithesis of life is slavery or the domination or something. The alternative, the enemy. What does the enemy represent? The enemy is not, his line is, whoever knows no other enemy than death and recognizes in his enemy nothing more than the empty mechanism is nearer to death than life. The comfortable antithesis of the organic and the mechanistic is itself something crudely mechanistic. So this organic versus is still mechanistic, a grouping which sees on the one side only spirit and life, and on the other, death and mechanism signifies nothing more than a renunciation of the struggle that amounts to nothing more than a romantic lament, right? This idea. This is, in other words, that they see this tension is between spirit and life and death and mechanism. This is itself a romantic lament. For life for life struggles not with death, spirit not with spiritness. Spirit struggles with spirit, life with life, and out of the power of the integral understanding of this arises the order of human things. Ab integro nascer ordono. This is Schmitt. This is that line from from Virgil's Eclogue 4, right, which reads Magnus et ab often rendered a new world order is born, or a great order of the ages is born anew. In Schmitt's context here, the abridgment could be interpreted to mean from integrity order is born, or an order is born from renewal. Right? This is what Schmitt seems to be saying here. In other words, an integral nexa, an order is born from this renewal in that sense. So is it renewal or what? Let's get that line correctly. Yeah, it's either from integrity order is born, or order is born from this integra. The original line is Magnus et empirio securum nesser order, right? Uh, um, as when the new world order is born, or the great order of the ages is born anew. It's the two possible renderings of the line from Virgil, right? Now he reduces it here to ab integro nesser order. So therefore, this Nesser auto has remained, and ab embryo is that thing. Therefore, this is why um, uh, the order is born, right? From this integrity or this renewal, the order is born. This is how he ends the article. Okay, we'll stop here. This has been a very. I hope this will be, people will find this useful and interesting. It is very a powerful article. This will lead into his concept of the Schmitt's concept of the political. If you liked it, like it. Have any comment? First of all, if you have any comments or questions or thoughts that you want to put down, please put them down. If you want me to have any questions for me, please put them down there. And when I see them, I'll respond to them. If you liked it, like it. Please share it with a friend. Share it on social media. Spread it around. If you're not a member, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe and encourage others to subscribe to see content like this. If you didn't like it, you can say no and say what you didn't like about it, and say please put it down so we can learn from it. Okay, say what was wrong. Okay, say what's wrong and what I got wrong, or maybe I misunderstood, misrepresented. But okay, specify. There's no that I don't and be rational, be adults in this. Oh no, okay, forget it. I'm not gonna get it. Another thing you can do, if you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. What else? Um, if you want to help me and help continue doing these videos, want to contribute to me doing these kind of videos, these kind of things, you can the links to subscribe to on Patreon is there. Of course, I expect help. Another way you can help is go buy my book, my recent book, which is it's not. It's recent book now is my 2022 book. It's called it's really a kind of Cliff's Notes on Aristotle's politics, a notebook on Aristotle's politics by Lulu. I published at Lulu myself, rather than a typical academic press. Why? Because it makes money. I need to make money. Need to make money, man. And if you want to help me make money, go buy. You can buy. If you buy it by Amazon, okay, it will be useful. But if you buy it by Lulu, it will help me directly. There's no links for that. Just go check Amazon or Lulu, and you'll see the book. But just check my name, Bates, and then you see my books. That's why you can help do it. Okay, that's it. Um, we'll take care. We finished this up, and we're done. So I hope to see you May 1st when I contribute starting doing my Montesquieu Spirit of the Laws. Take care and bye bye. Have a good day.